Hello. So this video is going to cover the topic of population ecology and then also a little bit of general ecology background as well. So let's dive in. These are our learning objectives. Basically, if you can take these and answer them, you're doing pretty well in terms of preparation for an exam. And your key terms. I highly recommend that you make note cards of these and review them every single day if possible, at least 5 minutes every day. Just go over all your key terms. It'll keep them nice and fresh and prepare you for the upcoming quizzes. You can find the definitions in here or in your textbook. So ecology itself is just a field of study within biology, kind of how for engineering you have mechanical, aerospace, all of that. They're fields within engineering. This particular field looks at the study of the relationship between living organisms and their environment. How do we interact with each other as far as living organisms go? How do we react to changes in our environment? How do we shape our environment? All of that stuff. And it comes from the Greek words oikos and logos, meaning house and study. So it's the study of our house. We're going to discuss topics like symbiosis, nutrient cycling, biomes, habitats, predator-prey interactions, all that kind of stuff. And for a field of science, it is relatively new. It was first introduced in 1866, and that's kind of a little bit more recent than even things like microbiology. So it's one of our more recent aspects of biology. So the first thing that we have to understand is that all life is organized. It's organized from the individual level up and the individual level down to the atomic level. We're going to get into the atom and the chemistry side of this later, but for now we're looking at big picture. We're kind of zooming out from the one individual, like the one person, and going back out to the globe. So we start with that singular individual, that one little fish, that one elk. And then you have a population, which is all of the same species of fish in a given area, all of the same species of elk in that given area. Then you have a community level. This is where we look at all living things in a specific given area. So you see, I keep repeating that term. A lot of ecology is based on what you're looking at and when and what you define as the boundaries. So for our aquatic example here, we've got the corals, the kelp, the different species of fish, the anemones, the starfish, all of those different species of living organisms and their interactions. For our more Mountain West biome, we have the moose, like the mountain lions, the different types of birds, the different types of prey animals, and all of the trees and shrubs and plants that we have in that area. An ecosystem level looks at not only the living organisms, but also the abiotic or the non-living aspects of that area. So in this case, it'll be the water. What's the temperature? How much dissolved oxygen is there? How much light is getting through? In the case of this Mountain West example, it's how much water is available. What is the structure of the geography in that area? Is it mountainous? Are there canyons? What's the air temperature? How much rainfall is there? All of those non-living components that make up the surrounding environment. Then we get into biomes, where we take, for example, I keep repeating Mountain West. That whole area of our globe has a very similar set of populations and communities and ecosystems, so we collect them all together into the same biome, like the jungle, the savanna, the taiga, the tundra, things like that. The coral reef, all of that. And then the biosphere is just the whole Earth, the collection of all the biomes on Earth. So for today's discussion, we're looking at the population level, so all of the individuals of a specific species in a given area. And this aspect of ecology focuses on what's the geographic range, how densely distributed are these is this population, are these individuals, what's the growth rate of the population, things like that. So the first one is geographic range. So this is the area inhabited by a population. And the size is going to obviously vary drastically based on what the type of species is. If you've got, a little ant, it's not going to need to take up as much space as a population as a herd of elephant will. So there's different types of considerations to take when looking at the geographic range. You're also looking at what type of ecosystem environment do they like to live in? Do they need water around? Do they need more open space? All of these considerations go into what the range of a specific population is. And on top of that, everything in the environment affects what their range can be. So humans are part of the environment as well. So as we continue to grow in our population, we are cutting into their ranges and their habitats and affecting their behaviors. Invasive species can come in. These are species that are not native to the area, and they can end up affecting the environment or even killing off or competing with the range of the host. And then there's extinction events that happen. So one organism, one population can actually lose its range entirely because all individuals within that population die out. Population density is looking at how many individuals exist in a unit of area. So basically, how closely stacked do these organisms live to each other in the population? If you're thinking about humans, this map kind of shows that, whereas the darker colors are showing where more humans live much closer to each other. The lighter areas show where the humans are a little bit more spread out. So in a place like China, you're going to have a lot more people just based on the population, so there's a lot less land that they can occupy because they have that higher population. Whereas Russia, there's a lot fewer people in a lot larger of a landmass, so there's a lower density of individuals, we say. This is going to differ by the species. You can be looking at the same field and there may be a very high density of mice, meaning that for any area, like 1 foot area that you grab out of this particular field, you're going to find a couple of mice, but a very low density of owls. Maybe there's only one owl for the entire field. So it just depends on the species and their behaviors. You can have a population distribution as well, which is kind of like looking at this density. How do they clump themselves? Do they tend to space themselves out very uniformly? Do they like to stay in little tiny groups and kind of chunk themselves all around? Or is it a completely random distribution? Then we also have to take a look at the growth rate of the population that we're looking at. And this is affected by many different factors. What are the birth rates? What are the death rates? How many of these organisms are moving into the population versus how many are leaving? Immigration and emigration. We're also going to look at things like limiting factors. So a population can only grow as large as the nutrients and space allow it to. So if there's not a lot of water, that's going to limit how large a population can grow. And then also the growth rate is going to be influenced by interactions with other organisms. If you're a bunny and you're living in a community where there's absolutely no predators, you're going to have a big population growth. If you are a bunny living near the edge of, let's say, Moore Park or TO, there's going to be a lot of coyotes around, and your population is probably going to be a little bit more controlled by interactions with those coyotes. So immigration is the process where the individuals move into an area from somewhere else. So you're adding numbers to your population, and the size of your population will increase over time. Emigration, a lot fewer people understand this term. It's the process of leaving your home range to go to a different area. Basically, you're leaving your population and moving somewhere else. I've lived all over the country, and so when I left Virginia, I emigrated from Virginia and immigrated to California. I made the population size in Virginia go down, the population size in California went up. Now, emigration often occurs with young males, especially if you're looking at a social group species. So the males will grow up and they will be kicked out of the group because they are competition for the reigning male at the time. They will have to leave and find a new population or start their own. So as I mentioned, there's many factors that limit or put a cap on how large your population can grow. If you don't have enough food, you're obviously not going to be making babies and growing the population because people are going to be dying from starvation. So limiting factors are going to put a cap on that population size, and we call that cap the carrying capacity. This is the maximum number of individuals of a particular species that a particular environment or community or ecosystem can support. So things like, are there predators? How many predators are there? Is there hunting allowed? Is there enough rainfall? Do you have, natural disasters like fires that come through the area? Is there enough prey for you to be able to hunt and get food? All of those things are limiting factors that can affect the carrying capacity. If you are the only coyote in an entire mountain range, you are going, well, you would need another coyote, excuse me. If you and, one other coyote are the only male and female coyotes in the entire mountain range, you are going to have your pickings of the food in that area. You can eat to your heart's content and you can reproduce to your heart's content as well. Now, let's say a larger predator comes in and starts to compete with you for those resources or even attack you as the coyote. You're not going to be focused as much on reproducing and growing your population. So there's going to be a lower cap on how big that population can grow. Now, once a species reaches carrying capacity, it's not a flat line. You're going to see that there's going to be some times where the population goes a little bit above its carrying capacity. Maybe they have enough resources for one summer that they can have extra babies and they'll have a population boom. But then that following winter, there's not enough food to go around and you'll have a bunch die and it'll kind of taper off below the carrying capacity again. So really, you're looking at overall, it's going to average out to the carrying capacity, but the actual population number will vary and kind of fluctuate right around that number. Now, we tend to take the population size of different groups and plot them. And we create these graphs and look at what type of growth they are experiencing. And this can give us an idea of how healthy an environment is, or what's the state of the resources in that environment, things like that. So there's really two different types of growth curves that we end up seeing. A J curve that has exponential growth and an S curve that has logistic growth. So let's go over these two. The J curve, because it looks like the letter J, represents exponential growth. This is the type of growth when the population has basically unlimited resources. It has few predators, nothing really stopping it. It's going to just keep growing and growing and growing. The larger the population size grows, the faster it will continue to grow. So at first you're going to have 2, then 4, then 8, but then you get to much higher numbers where if you have 100, now you have 200. If you have 200, next time around you're going to have 400, and it starts to grow much faster. Really, what a J curve is representing is ideal conditions. So this is the perfect kind of setup for a population to grow exponentially. It's exactly where we want to be. We don't have to worry about having enough food or water or space or sunlight or whatever it might be. We see this in bacteria. We put them in a new medium and they grow exponentially. We can actually plot this. And we're seeing it with the human population. Humans are very interesting as far as animals go as well, because we have tools and we can invent new tools that can take a scarcity of products and suddenly turn it into a surplus. For example, if we deplete the soil in a particular area of nutrients, Well, we then invent fertilizer and we add those nutrients back into the soil and can continue to produce food where otherwise we would have entered a famine period. So this exponential growth is often seen with invasive species as well. So a new organism gets brought from one country to another, a new environment, and it actually ends up flourishing, either because it doesn't have any natural predators or because it's a perfect environment for this new organism. And so you'll see a huge boom in their population size after they're introduced. So, as I said, an invasive species is a species that is not native to an area but gets introduced unintentionally, usually. So, usually an organism's natural habitat will keep its population under control. It evolved to live where it is found, so it has natural predators, it will have natural limits to its growth. But invasive species did not evolve in that area. So their limits might be different than what they experienced back home. If you took a plant from, California that often has limited water and you put it somewhere where now it gets a little bit more rain, it's going to flourish and potentially flourish even more than the local community. That's where you see a problem, where these organisms will end up doing better than the native population, and that results in an explosion in their population, and it can absolutely devastate local ecosystems and cause native species to go extinct. So an example are the Asian carp. We're going to talk about the Australian rabbits in class. Another one is these kudzu vines that you can see here. It's a vine that just absolutely takes over everything in its path. So all of these tall growths are actually trees that these kudzu vines have taken over. And if you can imagine, the tree underneath that can't get enough sunlight, so it starts to die, and the whole ecosystem underneath starts to fall apart. The other type of growth curve that we see is the S-curve, or logistic growth. So it's not growing exponentially, it's growing logistically. Now, this is more of the realistic growth pattern of organisms. Not every population is going to have unlimited resources all the time. There's almost always going to be a limiting factor to their growth. So in a logistic curve, you're going to see that at first, the population does begin to grow exponentially. But as they start reaching their carrying capacity that limit population size based on their available nutrients, you'll see that growth start to taper out and slow. And like I mentioned, when it hits carrying capacity, it's not going to be a flat line. It's going to fluctuate. It's going to go up and down based on, sometimes you may have a little bit more resources, or just the fact that sometimes you're going to produce more offspring than can survive anyway. So they're going to be born and then they're going to die out and things like that. Now, also you might see immigrations and emigrations, things like that. But overall, when you get to carrying capacity, the amount of births and the amount of deaths roughly equal each other, and the population stabilizes around that specific point. Now, if you have a sudden drought, that carrying capacity could end up dropping, and you can end up with a lower carrying capacity than before. If you suddenly have a really great season of rain and there's a lot more seeds than before and you're a bird, that carrying capacity might actually go up because you have more food available. Now, these aspects, these factors that limit or affect the growth of populations usually fall into two categories. They can be density dependent or density independent. When we say density dependent, these are operating based on how closely packed together the organisms are to each other in the population. So if you have a high density where, let's say like a city of humans like New York City, where they're living right on top of each other, you can't go a second of the day without seeing another human, versus, let's say you're a person living in the Yukon territories where you may not see another person for weeks. And that's because you go searching that person out. That's what we mean by density dependent. These factors exist when you have more of the individuals packed together than when you have fewer packed together. So let's talk about what I mean by that. An example is going to include competition. Now, when you go to a grocery store, if you're in the middle of the Yukon and there's, 100 people in your town, you're going to have your pickings of whatever is at the grocery store. But if you're in New York City and you eye, a donut that looks really, really good, well, you kind of might have to fight for that one because the other 20 people in line ahead of you might say that's a good looking donut and grab it before you can. So you're going to be competing over resources. In a more natural, non-human example, when you have a larger group of coyotes in a mountain range, they are going to compete with each other over food availability. If you had only 10 coyotes, they could feed themselves a lot better than, say, 100 could. They're going to have more competition over a limited resource, and that is food. Then you have things like predation. The more predators you get in an area, the more likely you are to get eaten, versus if you only have 1 or 2 predators in the area, you're a lot less likely to get eaten if you're a prey organism. Same thing with herbivory, eating plants. How many plants there are in an area will affect the population density of whatever is eating that plant. Then you'll have things like parasitism and disease and stress from overcrowding. The more individuals that you put into a smaller area, the more interactions they're going to have with each other. Like that example of New York, you're going to be passing by a person every single day. Take, for example, when we had COVID. Would you have rather been walking down the streets of New York or the streets of, small town Iowa? You're more likely going to bump into far more people in New York and pass on disease a lot easier. You're going to have a harder time keeping your sewage clean and sanitary. So your water system might get polluted and you'll get a parasite. And then just being close to people causes stress. Being close to other individuals causes more competition and more interaction, more stress, which can lead to further problems down the road. So these are only factors that come about when the population has a higher density, more individuals in a smaller area, or in a given area than before. So once again, this competition is when more than one organism uses the same resource at the same time. Resources can be water, food, space, air, sunlight, whatever it might be. And in the end, one organism is going to win and the other is going to lose out. Very rarely is it an equal exchange. One will end up getting a little bit more benefit than the other. So if you have more available resources, you will have to compete far less than if there's fewer resources. Now, there's other types of ways that populations can interact when they're very close together, and those are forms of symbiosis. And there's 3 types of symbiosis that we are going to discuss. The first one is mutualism. So when you meet someone and you're having a conversation and you end it and you're like, it was really nice meeting you, you can say in return, the feeling's mutual, meaning both of you are experiencing the same thing. You're getting the same benefit or negative out of it. And that's exactly what mutualism is. It's a very close interaction between 2 organisms where both of them are going to benefit. So an example is this top left image. You have the moray eel and a cleaner shrimp. The cleaner shrimp is allowed on the moray eel and the eel doesn't attack it because the shrimp is going to be eating parasites and dead skin and all this nasty stuff off of the eel. So the eel is getting the benefit of being clean and having a lower likelihood of getting a disease, and the shrimp is getting a free meal out of it, and it's getting to be safe. It's not going to be eaten by the eel. So there's an example where both are benefiting. Any type of pollinator species, you're looking at the same thing. The plant is benefiting by being able to reproduce because of the help of the pollinator, and the bee or the fly or the mosquito or whatever it is getting a benefit because it's getting food from the plant. Then we have lichen. This is an interaction between a fungus and a plant, and it actually, they help each other to survive in areas where otherwise they may not be able to. The next type is commensalism, which is a close interaction between two organisms where one is going to benefit and the other is kind of neutral. They couldn't really care what's going on around them with this other organism. So an example from this picture here, when you have large grazing animals like an elephant or cattle or something like that, they're going to be ripping up plants, either grass or trees or shrubs or something like that. When they do that action, they are going to be disturbing the soil. When you disturb soil, often what happens is a lot of bugs will come up because they're like, hey, my home just got ripped apart. And you'll have a bunch of grazing birds that come behind these larger organisms, eating all of the bugs that come up from the disturbed soil. The elephant and the cattle, they don't really care what's going on. They're just looking for food on their own. They're doing what they're going to do whether or not the birds are present. The birds, on the other hand, are benefiting from being around the grazing cattle or the elephants because they're getting an easier meal out of it. They don't have to go digging to find these bugs. The bugs are just kind of being served up to them on a platter. Another example is the clownfish and the anemone. The anemone doesn't really get much out of it, but the clownfish is getting protection from organisms that might otherwise eat them. There's sharks and remoras. If you've ever seen videos or pictures of sharks, they seem like they have these fish that are sticking to them and kind of floating around with them. Well, the shark doesn't get any benefit from this, but it's not hurt either. The remora gets a free ride and it gets the leftovers. So sharks, if you've ever seen them eat, are quite messy. And the remora is able to get whatever food particles make it past the shark. The last example here is parasitism, which is a close interaction where one organism is harmed by the other to benefit that other one. So usually when we talk about parasitism, a bunch of students have said, okay, isn't that like predation where I'm going to be, the wolf is eating the elk? No, not exactly. This is more a living together situation where the wolf is slowly picking off pieces of the elk, and that doesn't really work. So that's why the elk and the wolf, that's a predator-prey relationship. One is going to be killed and eaten. In the case of a parasite, you are living with this other organism on your body, and it is just slowly harming you by taking nutrients from you. So an example would be mosquitoes. They take our blood, and we are harmed by that, and they are benefited because the females get all of the protein that they need to be able to lay their eggs and have babies. Same thing with ticks. Cuckoo birds, they will never make their own nests. Instead, they lay their eggs in the nests of other birds. They make the other bird parents take care of the cuckoo bird baby, and the baby also grows faster than usually the other species in the nest. So they're bigger, faster, and they actually will pick up these other baby birds in the nest and throw them out and kill them. So the cuckoo bird is getting a benefit because it's getting, the parents don't have to raise the baby. The baby's getting taken care of by these other birds, and it's harming whatever species the nest originally belonged to by killing off their babies. Now, predation, as I said, is pursuing and consuming another organism for food. The predators are the ones that eat, the prey gets eaten. We can also consider this in the terms of herbivory, where the bunny is eating the plant. It's doing the eating, the plant gets eaten. And this is going to greatly affect, obviously, the ecosystem, population sizes, and all of that. The next thing we have to talk about are density independent factors. So we talked about how the more individuals you have in a specific area, the more interactions they're going to have, and those are all density dependent factors. Density independent factors are saying it doesn't matter whether there's 10 of you or 100 of you or 1,000 of you in this given space, they are going to affect you equally. Often you'll see these be major weather events like of drought, a fire coming through, a flood, hurricane, stuff like that. So they affect the population in a similar way, no matter the size or the density. They often cause a large crash immediately after, thinking like of a forest fire. There's a huge crash in the plant populations. So there's no food for the herbivores, so they all have to move out or die. So then there's no food for the predators, so they all have to move out or die. So after these events, you have very little life around, and it takes a while for that population and that ecosystem to recover. So examples are like the hurricanes destroying coral reefs, or droughts killing off species, etc. Now, emigration, leaving that area where the fire or the hurricane occurred, will lessen the impact of the factor, obviously, because then your whole population is leaving and going somewhere else rather than dying. So species can usually try to leave the area to mitigate the dangerous effect of this.